What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here, and it's Top 10 Thursday. This week I want to do something extra special, which is I want to take a look at some projects that are a little bit controversial, not because of their story or their gameplay, but instead because of what people think about them. Consider projects like Fallout 76. This is a game that when it came out was pretty much despised by every single critic and reviewer, but even still, it managed to gain a very small but ultra-hardcore fanbase. And personally, I find things like this just extra intriguing. So today, what I want to do is really try and dive into the fan bases and communities that manage to love games despite the fact that they may have very low critic review scores. Are you ready? Let's get into it. Number 10. Detroit Become Human. There are some video game directors out there that are just so divisive, where there's a certain audience that really likes their stuff and a separate group that just utterly despises it. And I've always been very interested in David Cage because his stuff is supposed to really elicit a particular emotion. This guy is basically a movie director who wants to make really weird think pieces. And personally, I do dig his stuff. I think his projects are very intriguing and artistic, if not a little bit flawed. But funny enough, whenever his games come out, reviewers usually just rip them apart. And yet, there's still just a huge group of people out there who just get super invested in the worlds he weaves. Like Detroit Become Human. This, on the surface, is just a silly little story about androids trying to seek their own sentience, but there are people who really related to that and ended up doing things like giant montages, huge pieces of their own, and even creating their own cosplays, that way they can be the characters in real life, which I feel like is a big testament to the power of Detroit. Number 9. Mad Max. There are a few aspects of this industry that are just so hard to predict the outcome of. I mean, you can make the best game in the world, but if you release it at the wrong time, it might end up completely bombing, which in my opinion is exactly what happened with Mad Max. This came out a week apart from Metal Gear Solid 5, which at the time is all anybody could talk about. This created a huge shadow that made it where everybody was paying attention to the game over here instead of Mad Max, which is a shame because this is a very interesting open world experience. It has essentially a combat system that feels a lot like Batman Arkham Origins or Arkham Asylum. It allows you to have almost this rhythm-based hand-to-hand fighting, and yes, it's a little bit quirky at times because you can just pick up practically infinite items, but still, I really admire this Mad Max project. It's something that manages to make car combat fun, it manages to make that moment-to-moment grittiness of the world feel realistic, and really it's one of those games that doesn't mind having the guts of being based on a movie while standing so totally on its own. Number 8. Friday the 13th. Now this entry on the list is a little bit different from the other games that are being contained within this video because I think that while many of these projects are debated whether they are actually good or bad, most of us can agree that Friday the 13th is actually pretty terrible. But what's weird is that it's still extremely fun. This is a game where one person is playing as Jason Voorhees, the unstoppable killing machine himself, and everybody else is a camp counselor. And there's basically a strategy to this, where all the counselors have to get together to try and find some way of escape, either car keys to repair a vehicle, or some gas for a boat, that way you can just cruise away across Crystal Lake. But what's really interesting about this is that there's such a heavy social dynamic. You have to talk to people. You have to sort of create your own stories on every single map, which really transcends the basicness of this game. It's not exactly super original, and it's certainly not a game that plays super great, but still, I was so into it and ended up putting nearly 100 hours into this goofy slashing simulator. Number 7. Nier. If you've been subscribed to this channel for a while, I'm sure you realize that one of my very favorite things to do in the entire universe is to review games. To try and beat them and find all the side quests and learn all the secrets and then do a big video on it. But something I like to do is after I post my own video, a lot of times I like to watch other people's reviews and see, did they get it? Were they able to understand a game that's super weird and complex? And Nier, this is definitely one of those games that people just did not understand. It's very conceptual. It has a lot of very deep and weird elements to it that you need to just try and consume in order to fully get. And because of this, critics were extremely harsh on it at launch. They kind of just ignored it as this weird little side project that could just be completely dismissed, which is a little bit of a shame because it is a very experimental and admirable project. I dig it. It's an RPG that's thinking so far outside the box that you basically need to watch 10 different ending explain videos to fully understand it. Number 6. The Division. There's a saying I've heard before that I think is very important to hear, which is that gaming is the most difficult art form. Now, what I believe they mean by this is that this is one of those things that's very different. Our art is not something that you can just put in a painting or listen to like a song or watch like a movie. Instead, as gamers, we are in a way having to build the art with the developers. We are somebody who has to log into this universe and try and pick up the pieces and help craft the tapestry of the tale. To me, that is extremely cool, and it's one of the things that really kind of got me extra invested in the universe of The Division, because in my opinion, at launch, this game was very bad. It was pretty limited, there wasn't a lot of great mechanics, and just the combat, trying to go and shoot people, was extremely clunky. But what's interesting is millions and millions of players decided to stick with this universe and give very detailed feedback to the developers, giving them a chance to improve it and expand it and make something that is very extraordinary. At the end of it, the first Division game completely got reinvented into a totally different project. Their dedication made the world better. These players loving the universe made it the universe to be loved. And to me, that is a story that I think is more interesting than just all the static paintings in every museum across the planet. Number 5. Sonic Forces. You know, I might regret even bringing this up, but the Sonic fanbase is very energetic. Half of them are very positive people who love to just play games and draw art and do silly stuff, but there are definitely some people who are a little bit too obsessed with Sonic. They think that the Blue Hedgehog is practically a deity. But what's weird is that while these groups are very separated, they all came together when it came to Sonic Forces. This is a very bad game. I mean, it is just not enjoyable. It has weird levels that are practically on autopilot. There's a custom character who's a little bit creepy in my opinion. And also, even on the really good 2D levels, it doesn't manage to be as good as another game like Sonic Generations. It just doesn't manage to do anything exceptionally well, which is a big drawback. And yet, even as I say this, there are tons and tons of people who literally this second are playing and loving this game. Sonic Forces is a very poorly designed mess. But that doesn't stop people from just playing through it again and again, trying to get the maximum rank on every level, and doing drawings of their own custom character chilling with Sonic. It's just one of those things where I feel like it is the huge disparity between what reviewers think, critics believe, and what the fanbase truly desires. Number 4. Fallout 76. The studio Bethesda for a long time was considered to be nearly the perfect game developers. It seemed like every project they touched instantly turned into a classic. Things like Morrowind and Fallout 3, and of course even the things they just slightly touched like New Vegas. These were things that just rose to the highest heights, and gamers of course picked them up and played them for millions of hours collectively. But the weird thing was that while we all loved their games, eventually there was a downfall. Any series that goes on long enough eventually becomes rather terrible, and the fall that they ended up having was Fallout 76. Now, to me, this game sucks. I mean, quite clearly, it is a glitchy, broken, terrible game. And yes, they managed to do some patches, but even with the revised aiming and new modes, it is still a game that is hardly even worth talking about. But strangely enough, there is a very dedicated, very just contained group of people who have spent every single day since launch playing this game, exploring these lands, getting more loot, and to me, that is just baffling. It feels like I just got off a long day at work and tried to turn on the television and it's just screeching a terrible racket that makes my ears bleed, but somehow every other person in the room is just watching it like nothing's wrong. This game is appalling, and yet people seem to love it. Not everybody, it's certainly an acquired taste, but for those who manage to stomach Fallout 76, to them this is a very strange multiplayer masterpiece. Number 3. Days Gone. It's not often that I find myself just shocked by something in the gaming industry. I feel like in general I've managed to see so much and do so much that getting caught off guard just doesn't happen very often. But what's funny is that Days Gone has honestly completely blown me away. Now, I wasn't just super into the game myself, but month after month, this game continues to sell a bunch of copies, it continues to have a very vibrant online conversation, and there's actually now thousands of videos out there defending how good it is. I am actually just impressed that it managed to garner so much support. This is just one of those games that managed to have a bunch of people who came together and went, hey, screw the Metacritic, screw the reviews, I just want to kill zombies. I just want to drive around on my motorcycle and be a bro out here in the wilderness. It's not exactly anybody's cup of tea, but for that certain demographic that is really craving this style of action, it is a very, very cool little game. Just because of this overwhelming fan support, I think it's pretty obvious that at some point, just because of their love of this game, we're probably going to get a Days Gone 2. Number 2. No Man's Sky. When this game dropped in 2016, it was pretty overwhelmingly hated. And yes, I'm being serious about the word hate. People didn't just despise it, people weren't just disappointed by it, they were actively angry at this project. There were so many people that were just downvote bombing it all over the internet, and huge viral posts calculating every single dishonesty thing that was ever said by the director Sean Murray. But what's funny is that the story of this game doesn't really conclude there. Instead, the development team decided to stick with it and release big update after big update to try and expand the game tremendously, including actual multiplayer and some real choices that I think were pretty bold. What's really kind of strange though, and the thing that I think makes it the most noteworthy, is ever since launch, there were people who never stopped playing. They locked themselves in this world to try and see how this journey really turns out. In fact, the people who loved this game over the course of these years are so dedicated, they secretly pulled together their money and even bought a billboard next to the studio of these game makers to thank them for their dedication. That to me is mind-blowing. It is really a testament to the uniqueness and the energy contained within No Man's Sky. Now, I'm probably never going to go back and play it ever again, but I'm still just one of those people that can sit back and look at it and go, wow, this is something that'll probably never happen again. Number 1. Final Fantasy 13. Now, some of you may be a little bit stunned or taken aback by this because I consider myself the biggest Final Fantasy fanboy on the planet. My greatest gaming achievement is the fact that over the last 20 years, I have managed to track down and beat every single Final Fantasy. The weird spin-offs, the exclusives, if it's got FF in the title, I have personally conquered it. And the only ones that I really consider to be an unplayable mess is Final Fantasy 13. This game is a travesty. It's basically a hallway with a confusing story about Fal'Cie and l'Cie and people trying to fill their giant destinies. It is terrible, but for some reason, people love it. Now, I just want to say, I know that I am wrong here. Even though it is just so against my tastes, I can still step back and realize that other people enjoy it, and they are totally correct in their love. There are people who are just so into the idea of Lightning and her struggle and all the weirdness of this story and its twists and turns. Now, I think that the idea of the stagger system and the fact that you can't just power level in this game is just such a bad flaw, but other people enjoy that. Other people think that this game is super, super good, to the point at which there are actually people I have spoken to personally who think that this is the best Final Fantasy, which will never stop just completely exploding brain cells. But for that reason, I want to award this my #1 pick as the game that critics hated, but somehow fans utterly love. Did your favorite bad game not make the list? Got an idea for a future top 10? Leave it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. A lot of these top 10s lately have actually been suggested by subscribers, and this one is by my friend Ultra Tiny Gamer. He brought this up during the charity live stream I did this weekend, and I just thought that it was such a brilliant idea I had to do it. So Ultra Tiny, thank you, man. This video is completely because of you. You rock. Thank you, everybody. And I'm going to put in one more keep dreaming. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.